You know, when we decided to do this deep dive into autism, I don't think I realized just how much there was that I didn't know. And we're really focusing on the challenges that Black women face getting diagnosed. And this website, Cheapaba, they had some really eye-opening articles.
It's really interesting when you start to think about all the different factors that come into play here.
Yeah.
It goes beyond just autism. We're talking about societal perceptions, cultural background, healthcare, all of these things colliding.
Right. And the article mentioned this term intersectionality, which I'll admit I wasn't totally familiar with.
Yeah. So intersectionality basically means that a person's different identities, they don't exist separately from each other.
Mhm.
So like for a Black woman who's also experiencing autism, those two parts of her identity, they're intertwined.
Oh, I see. So it's not just being Black AD being potentially autistic. It's like those two things together create a whole other experience.
Exactly. And that's where traditional diagnostic criteria often fall short
Hmm.
because they're not really equipped to deal with that level of complexity, you know?
So are you saying like being a Black woman comes with a certain set of stereotypes,
Yeah.
and then when you add potential autism symptoms on top of that, it's like this whole other layer of potential misinterpretation?
Exactly. There's this great example in the article. Let's see if I can remember it. Okay, so imagine a Black woman who isn't comfortable in social situations. Now, that could be a sign of autism, right? But because of those harmful stereotypes, it might be misinterpreted as her having an attitude.
Wow, and that one little misinterpretation could mean the difference between someone getting the support they need and just continuing to struggle alone. And then there's camouflaging, which I have to say when I read about it, it really got to me.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it? This idea that people, especially women, feel like they have to mask their autistic traits just to fit in.
Yeah, and I can only imagine the toll that takes, constantly second-guessing yourself, trying to appear normal.
Hmm.
It makes you wonder how many people are going through that right now. And, you know, this also ties into something else the article highlighted, which is the financial burden of it all. Like, getting diagnosed and accessing things like ABA therapy can be so expensive.
Right, and that's really a microcosm of a much larger systemic issue. Black individuals statistically face more barriers to healthcare in general. And then you add in potential biases from medical professionals who might not be culturally sensitive.
And it's like all of these things just create another barrier.
Exactly. It's like barrier after barrier. And that's why it's so important to talk about these issues, to bring them to light. But thankfully, the article didn't just leave us with despair. There was actually some hope in there, too.
Okay, I'm listening. What needs to change?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is education. And I don't just mean basic autism awareness. It's about really understanding the spectrum, the diversity of how autism can present, especially in the context of different cultures.
So kind of like challenging those assumptions we might have without even realizing it.
Exactly. And part of that is making sure that Black autistic voices are front and center. They need to be the ones leading this conversation, sharing their experiences, so we can start to dismantle those harmful stereotypes.
Yeah, it can't just be about them. It has to be from them.
100%. And it's not just about changing the system. It's about changing the conversation within the Black community, too. The article talked about how important it is to make mental health a normal thing to discuss. Something that people feel comfortable talking about.
Which is tough because there's still so much stigma around it in a lot of communities.
Absolutely. So it's about creating those safe spaces where people can talk openly without fear of judgment.
Yeah.
And seek help if they need it. Something else that really stood out to me from the article was how, for Black women, getting that diagnosis can be such a double-edged sword.
Ah, that's interesting. How so? Well, on the one hand, it can be so validating, right? Like finally having an answer for why you feel the way you do. But on the other hand, there's this added layer of, what now? Especially given everything we've talked about with the potential for misunderstanding and bias.
Right. It's like they finally have this explanation, this key to understanding themselves. But then there's this pressure of deciding who to tell, how much to reveal, knowing that it might not be received well.
Exactly. It highlights this really difficult reality, which is that for some people, that diagnosis might bring relief and clarity, but for others, it could mean facing even more hurdles, more judgment, more pressure to justify their experiences.
And it breaks my heart because they deserve so much better. They deserve to feel seen and celebrated for who they are, not judged or misunderstood. I couldn't agree more. And it goes back to the need for widespread education, awareness, and empathy. It's about recognizing that everyone's journey is unique and valid, and we need to create a world where those differences are not just accepted but celebrated.
I love that, celebrating differences. It shouldn't be about fitting into some narrow definition of normal. It's about embracing the full spectrum of what makes us human.
Exactly. And that's where allyship comes in. It's about listening, learning, and using our voices to advocate for change. Because ultimately, creating a more inclusive world benefits everyone.
It's like that saying, diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And it seems like we're still kind of figuring out the steps to make that dance floor, welcoming for everyone.
That's a great way to put it. And part of that is shifting from just awareness to action.
Yep.
Right? It's not enough to just know about these issues. We actually have to do something about them.
Okay, so what would that look like in our everyday lives? How can we be better allies to Black women with autism?
It starts with listening, seeking out those voices,
Mm.
amplifying their stories, believing their experiences. And when you encounter those harmful stereotypes, don't be afraid to say something.
Because even small actions can make a difference, right? Like I'm thinking about how I can be more mindful of the language I use, the assumptions I might be making without even realizing it.
Exactly. It's about that constant self-reflection, that
Yeah.
willingness to learn and unlearn. And then, of course, there's advocating for systemic change, supporting organizations that champion neurodiversity, pushing for more inclusive policies. Those actions have a ripple effect.
Wow, this deep dive has really been something else. We've gone from uncovering these hidden challenges to really exploring how we can be a part of the solution. It's a lot to think about, but I feel hopeful. How about you?
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, this is about recognizing the humanity in everyone, regardless of how their brain is wired.
Hmm.
It's about creating a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued for who they truly are.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, a huge thank you to you for taking us on this deep dive. It's been truly eye-opening. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us. We hope this has given you something to think about, maybe even inspired you to be a part of the change. Because
Yeah.
every voice, every action makes a difference.